So it's really my role, very quickly, to welcome you to the University of Salford. We're very fortunate to have this as one of our bases for teaching opportunities and seminars like this, so you're all very welcome. But I also want to tell you a little bit about the Making Research Count initiative and to provide some context about the kind of event that you're here to today. It's a national initiative of 10 universities across the United Kingdom. University of Salford is the Greater Manchester hub for Making Research Count. And our Making Research Count programme tries to work around the broad concept of integrative services, so interprofessional work, those issues that kind of cut across social care, social work, health, housing, those sorts of social issues. And because of the kind of work that goes on at the university, there is a lot of excellent work that goes on across university, particularly within the School of Nursing, midwifery, social work and social sciences. A lot of the work we do is very applied and we're very good at doing the work, but not so good at telling other people about the findings and the application of that. Hence, the Making Research Count initiative is one of our prime vehicles, trying to tell people about some of the excellent work we're doing, but also then to bring in other people to talk about how that relates to their work as well. So in that sense, we try to act as a bit of a knowledge broker, a place and a vehicle for people to come together and have those kind of useful conversations across broad but very challenging issues, as is evident today as well. So lots of people here are a mixture of academics, practitioners, policymakers, people from various sectors, and I encourage you all in the times that we've got to break out and network to make best use of that and meet people that you've never met before and start new conversations and new opportunities potentially. And really, we're also quite responsive. We have a wide range of pieces of research that we're undertaking and we're delivering on all the time, and there's a number of things we want to shout about and tell people about, but we also want to know what is useful for you and your organisations. So if there's particular issues that you feel that you or your organisation has a gap in knowledge, we'd love to hear from you, and if we've got enough requests for kinds of events, we can pursue putting on different kinds of events as well. So we try to be as responsive as possible to what your needs are as well. So that's it from me. I'll pass over to Tony, who will introduce the next speaker and take you through the rest of the day. But again, finally, welcome.
You would please know I don't have a presentation either. We have 3 fabulous presentations for you. There's plenty of time in these presentations as well for us to engage in some discussion afterwards. But remember, we do have a panel discussion at the end. If anybody wants to come and tell me at any point that they have a question they think really must be brought up at that panel discussion, please come and tell me. I'll write it down and write your name down, make sure that you get your chance to ask your question. There will be time at the end of each presentation to ask some questions, really burning questions, but we do want, just for once, for speakers to have the chance to really expand upon their topic properly. So we're going to move straight into this with our first speaker, Donna Peach. Now, Donna is a great conversationalist, so I will try to remind her that we might want some time at the end for questions.
Good morning, everybody. I tend to jig around a little bit. I'm going to try and stay fairly still. Can you all hear me? If you struggle hearing me at the back, wave, and I will raise the volume for you. So thank you so much for coming here today. So the sexual abuse of children is something that's really passionate to me, and I imagine that you've all given time to come today. It's something that's really passionate to you too. But I'm going to try and stay focused and not get caught up in emotional stories that I've experienced, and I'm sure you have as well. I never talk about this topic without acknowledging that certainly in a room this size, more than one of us will have experienced, and certainly will know somebody who's experienced sexual abuse, and it can be a really very difficult and emotive topic to talk and to think about. And so we just need to take care of ourselves when we're doing this today and when we're doing it in practice. And I suppose also the other thing I just want to hold with us in the room is that while we're sat here at this moment, and certainly while we'll be sat here during the course of the morning, you know, that out there in the world, children are being raped and are being tortured and are being humiliated, you know, right at this very time. And that, you know, what we're doing in thinking about that and emotionally holding that is crucially important to making a difference to reduce that happening out in the world. And that's just the kind of tone for today, I guess. So my ambition is to kind of make this everybody's business, and that although I'm assuming most of us will come with some kind of professional hat on today, that really changing the nature of sexual abuse has to be owned, and everyone has to feel they belong to the solution out in the street. I'm not going to go on too much about myself, but I come from, you know, a very poor area of Manchester. I probably come from a family, from a community that wasn't expected to do very well, wouldn't have a voice. Very strange for me, Donna Peach, to be stood here with you all listening to me today, because I'm not that sort of person. I don't come from that sort of area, that sort of expectation. And it's exactly people who come from where I come from that we need to be talking with, to making them feel empowered in having a voice. And that's one of my key aims before I die, to help that happen. So I want to talk today about some issues of acceptance, things that we need to start accepting with the issue of child sexual abuse, some of the challenges that we face, and how we can create opportunities to start making a difference. It's hard to talk about child sexual abuse, and the fact that we've all come today is a real measure of courage, because some people would find it difficult to sit in this room and to think about that and to contemplate that. So it's really great that you're able to do that. And we're talking about babies, children, young people, and I would also include, you know, vulnerable young adults, you know, adults with learning disabilities who are cognitively not functioning at an adult level, developmental level, who are raped and tortured and humiliated, and that this is about emotional abuse, physical abuse, and actual harm to people's very self. And that we just don't hear about it. Someone said to me, I get carried off onto a tangent, a student of mine, that they'd seen a programme recently that sort of said, well, this is how sexual abuse is. You know, it doesn't really happen with babies, and then it sort of climbs up as children get older, and then after 16, it's kind of, you know, they're old enough to walk away from it. And it just reminds me that as humans, we kind of need to feel safe with these things. We think, oh, we know what it is, and we can draw a graph and we say, right, okay, this is it, and we know what it is, and we can contain it. And the reality is that we can't. The reality is that we've never got to grips with this problem. And it will come on later, but I think we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really come together and to galvanise ourselves and to make a difference with this. And you know, you're all part of that solution today. So fly the flag. And victims and perpetrators exist in every class, every gender, every race and culture, and we're just not seeing all of those things. For different reasons, we're able to access different groups and to have some understanding of them. And today's topics, as you'll hear the different talks, will give us the opportunity to look at some of the scope of what we do understand, but the massive gaps in what we don't understand. It's always happened, and it might be constructed in different ways, at different times, in different places, but sexual abuse of children has always happened. And, you know, it probably always will happen. We have to be realistic, but it doesn't mean that we can't search for ways to make it happen less. And that I'm going to argue today that social, cultural, legal definitions and interpretations of what is abuse and what is a child contributes to sometimes assisting children in being safe, but also in keeping children in places where they're unsafe. we're dealing with a problem that is of epidemic proportions. I'm sure that's not quite technically the right word, but this is a massive problem. The World Health Organization estimates something like 223 million children are subject. And when we did that for the slide, for the advertising for today's event, Aisling and I stopped and thought, oh my gosh, let's just think about what that is. What does 223 million children look like? And that might make us think, well, who am I, Donna Peach, to go away and deal with that problem? And you might think, well, who am I? What can I do? My diary is full today. And what can I do? We have to do something. And each of us do something that will then bring momentum, and it will start to make a massive difference. So worldwide, we're looking at 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 7 boys being victimised. And what Greater Manchester Police have said is that as the work that they're doing is drawing in more disclosures, the difference between boys and girls disclosing still remains the same. But every child is at risk. And in the world that we live in with technologies and media, children can go from not being a victim to being a victim in 15 minutes. I was at a conference in Rotherham and the police there were telling a story about a child who was about 8 years old, playing on her iPad. Mum was in the vicinity, she was talking to somebody online, Mum was doing the laundry, and within 15 minutes this perpetrator had engaged this child, made friends, got her to go to the bathroom, to take her clothes off, to take a photograph of herself, and to send that to them on the internet while Mum was putting washing in the basket ready to load the washing machine. Every child is at risk. In some of the research I've done, people have said it's like letting a child go to the bedroom with a paedophile because they just have access. And we're dealing with a determined and predatory force who are actively engaged in targeting children for their own gratification. And we have to be equally determined and organised if we're going to combat that. Are you all ready for it today? Did you have coffee this morning? We have a challenge on our hands. And the perpetrators have different modes of operating. And they have different ways, they have different needs for themselves that they're meeting, and different ways of targeting different children. And in some ways that becomes problematic, I think, and I'm going to talk about that some more. What are we talking about? So for many years we've talked about child sexual abuse, and then with recent events in the last couple of years, suddenly we're talking about child sexual exploitation. And if we look at different organisations' websites, we look at National Crime Agency, or we'll look at what the MSPCC is talking about, they start to try to make distinctions about what is CSA and what is CSE. And what seems to be a common theme emerging is that CSA is something that's familial, and it kind of people who are connected with the family who are abusing the child. And CSE is to do with the thing that happened in Rotherham and Rochdale and Oxford, and they're about groups of men who are kind of targeting teenage girls on the street. The adrenaline's going. I would say that is a problem that we're trying to make this distinction. I would argue that child sexual abuse is always exploitative. And how do we distinguish between a gang of men who are deciding to abuse children under CSE and a paedophile ring who are kind of moving children around? And I don't know your histories. In my 30 years as a social worker, I worked with children and with families where children were in both of them camps. You know, that some men will not sexually abuse their own child, or they're quite happy for somebody else to do it, and they will abuse their children. And I think it's a real problem that we start to put children, under this broad umbrella of what is a child, in camps that suit the way that we group perpetrators. Because I think it takes us away from thinking about what does this mean for the child, not only in what has happened to them, but what legacy they take on and how that impacts on their identity in the future. So the next two slides are looking at definitions of child sexual abuse and exploitation. Thank you. So the you can't see the screen, it's small, but it's just to highlight. So this is the government's definition of child sexual exploitation, 2013. And it kind of, where the red bits are, so whether or not the child knows what's happening, it's about sexual activities. It's about sexual images. It's about children behaving in sexually inappropriate ways. You'll get all these slides. And that sexual abuse, one of the different things from the victimization is not only about men abusing, but it's also about women. But essentially, most of this text starts to talk about masturbation, kissing up, and gives us a detailed list of what those activities are. Go to the next slide, please. My able assistant actually go over here. And this is the World Health Organization. This is from 1999. And if I read just some bits of this out, when I reread this stuff, I think, gosh, this is what exploitation is. And what I'm trying to get over is that they're one and the same, that sexual abuse comes in different guises. And if we start to struggle with that as professionals, and as academics and researchers, let me tell you, there's nothing more in life than the little problems we're thinking about. And I'm going to give you some details of that. But while we're thinking about it, and while we're talking about it, what do people like my sister think? What do people like my brother think? What do people like my cousins and my friends, who come from Openshaw, who live in Wythenshaw, who live in places in Manchester that are never going to come to places like Media City, sit in a room like this? How are they supposed to make sense of what it is if we can't decide amongst ourselves, so we're sort of positioned as experts? So this talks about sexual activity. It talks about children not being developmentally able to understand what's happening or not being in the position to give consent. It talks about abuse being to gratify or satisfy the needs of another. It talks about exploiting children into prostitution or other unlawful sexual practices. These are languages, these are words that we would perhaps associate with exploitation rather than what is being termed as sexual abuse within the family. Now, I'm pleased the Children's Commission has recently put out a report about familial child sexual abuse, because I was worried that we were losing sight of that because we were only talking about a particular sort of sexual exploitation. But I think if we start to fragment it, we problematise it, we make it harder for the people who need to know, who need to be able to think, yeah, actually that doesn't feel right, I think it might be something wrong, and we'll report it. So, sorry, I know you can't see these slides, these are just sort of to assist me a little bit. This is a study cut by Braley and Covey, 2014, you'll get the slides. And what they found is that major organisations which look at the trafficking of children, so we have kind of trafficking was about children in other places, wasn't it, and across countries, and we became worried about child trafficking being that. And then it's like, oh, actually children are being trafficked within the UK. Well, what do we think about that? What is that? And how do we know if someone's being trafficked or not? Now, I've seen this. I've worked cases where the police have stopped cars on the motorway, and then they're trying to work out, well, what is the relationship of everybody in this car and what is really happening? And it's a real problem for them to try to determine what those things are. And so these researchers have tried to look at what the different things people are saying, and then how do we sort of bring this into one model. And it becomes a problem. So in their model, they say, well, it can be any mode of transport. It doesn't matter what sort of vehicle you're in. I'm not sure if that matters if you're on a train or a tram, I'm not really sure. That the offenders have to be aged 18 or over. That the child has to be 17 years old or younger. There was something I'd read, so there must be at least one victim. And I'm sure it said there had to be at least sort of 2 adults, there had to be 2 perpetrators. So what happens if you've just got one guy in a car taking a child, to be abused, at a hotel in Oldham or whatever? What does that constitute and how do we do that? And part of the problem is that we need definitions, because we're human, we like to categorise things and make sense of what they are. But in narrowing down these things and finding a way of how do we define it so somebody can identify it, we miss really what's happening in many other ways. And I think what we're learning about child sexual abuse is that opening up that space to allow to make sense of different experiences is the way forward rather than closing down these conversations. So we need to increase awareness and acceptance that it's happening. And in some of the work I've done, people have said, I find this really hard. Even thinking in my neighbourhood that it's happening is a really difficult thing for me to spend time thinking about. But equally, I'm going to places where people say, what can I do? You know, what can my organisation do? We go out and fit gas boilers. We're always in people's houses. What should, you know, people going and fitting gas boilers, what should we know? And that brings me on to that, you know, there's a money-making business here. There's an opportunity for people. I go to conferences all the time. People set up companies and say, right, we're doing this now, we're doing this now. We've got skills to market ourselves in this area. And that's the way of the world. But I'm very passionate that we have to give back, that we have to not only take opportunities, we live in a capitalist society, but we have to always be critically mindful of what that is and how that fits into the bigger picture. We have to be moral and we have to have integrity in everything that we're doing if we're going to challenge these sorts of issues. Okay, what is a child? So, what is a child? Does it mean if you're under 18 these days, you're a child, and therefore you can be subject to child sexual abuse and exploitation? So the Sexual Offences Act makes a distinction, doesn't it, between a child being under 18 and a child being under 13. It distinguishes in one section about, you know, there's photographs and images between 16 and 17-year-olds, and then we get caught up with marriage and things like that. It becomes a problem. These days, children are staying in school longer, aren't they? We've got to stay in education longer, which kind of changes what is constructed as a child. So do we count 18 then? You know, some children still in school at that time. Are they a child? Are they an adult then because that's their 18th birthday, they change? What happens if you have somebody with learning disabilities? So they're chronologically 16 or 17 or 18, but they're functioning in their comprehension at a much younger age. And there was a case that I know of where a child was trafficked from the age of 14 and was found intoxicated in a hotel room at the age of 16 after the hotel manager had phoned the police, said, I'm really worried about what's going on here. And this young person had lots of different needs, including learning disabilities, and it wasn't prosecuted because the police said, well, she was 16, well, she could have given consent that day. And I'm not criticising the police, it's about the legal system and about how we look and how we construct what these problems are. But the room that then gives perpetrators and offenders to target very vulnerable people in our communities, because actually they can get away with that easily with perhaps the can with other situations. So this is just comparing in the same act what is rape, and when we get into this convoluted thing about giving consent and why we distinguish about 13-year-olds perhaps being able to do that when under 13-year-olds can't, and if these are the structures that we have to work within, what messages does that again send to the outside world and to us ourselves about what is a child? So people are criticised, aren't they, in Rotherham and in Rochdale for having these young girls going off and not thinking and not taking into account. I'm going to show you some evidence that that's still the case, that we still blame victims, that we still see young people as having agency to make their own choices. And absolutely should make their own choices. But we should all still be learning, and young people are still learning on how to keep themselves safe. And working with a predatory force who hoodwink them, who some people say brainwash them, as professionals we use this word grooming, who coerce them into behaving in ways which leave them vulnerable. I'm okay for time. Okay, so I think we need to look at this demonisation, I've called it, of victims, of young people who seemingly put themselves at risk and leave us as adults feeling exasperated that, you know, I've tried to keep them in. You know, the stories that came out from Rotherham about a father who tried to keep his daughter safe and, you know, couldn't stop her leaving the house, so tied her to the bed and then ended up in trouble with the police himself for doing that, but he had no way of trying to stop her from leaving the house when the perpetrators were turning up in cars outside, you know, outside the house. So these are really difficult. We need to look at came out of the Rotherham research is that everybody who was interviewed felt that perpetrators 18 and under were themselves victims, and that we need to start looking at the behaviour of people who offend in a different way, because if we just demonise them, how are we going to get them to come forward and engage so that we can look at, you know, why they behave this way, and even how that's constructed, so that, I'm getting on a bit now, but when I was younger, you could go out, I could be 50 and have a 17-year-old boyfriend, and it wouldn't necessarily be looked on or frowned upon as wrong. These days, 17-year-old boys are in a really difficult position. The parents of 17-year-old boys are in a really difficult position if they're then going out with a girl who is sort of 15 or 16 even. It becomes really problematic. And we need to start thinking about what climate are we creating for our children and people to grow and mature in, to learn about relationships in, and then what is the legacy of that for the future for them. Misogyny we're going to cover because that is completely woven into the tapestry of this issue. Thank you, Tony. Homophobia. There was a father I was talking to a few weeks ago whose son had just gone through a court trial. His son had been victimised from the age of 13 by multiple offenders. And most of those offenders pleaded guilty, and some didn't, and there was a trial, and they were all convicted. But in the summing up of the case, the judge still placed responsibility on the boy for putting himself in that scenario. And that has to be, in my view, about this idea of homophobic sort of thoughts and assumptions about that sort of behaviour of boys, you know, being with men and what that means. We need to start to unravel and really critically analyse what we all think, what people in the justice system think, what people in social services think and the health system. Because we're all brought up with prejudice and bias, we're all brought up with thinking, well, I'm not really sure how to think about that. We have to start learning how to think about these things and sharing that with others. And racism, I'm going to come on to some of those things, and Muzammil will cover some of that in his talk as well. Because of what's happened in certain areas in the UK, this understanding that it's Asian men that are the problem is often, you know, what people will take is what people, certainly in those communities, think is their problem. But it isn't with us. I've heard some very bigoted comments in the last few months from, you know, white men who think it's actually, you know, we're okay, we're not, you know, the risk. It's that group of men over there. And we have to start dealing with that. We have to start dealing with people like the EDL who think they can come in and, you know, really constrain communities and affect the lives of people using racism as a way forward. But equally, we need to look at the issue of race and how it affects young people, because these are, you know, children and young people, certainly in the work that I've been doing, have been really affected by what's happening in their communities. And we need to look at how children in different communities have different ways of speaking out, different ways of overcoming the barriers to them. And I suppose when I'm talking racism, it's not just about a colour thing, you know, it's about working with Roma and Gypsy children. It's about us opening up our minds and hearts to looking about how to engage and understand different communities. Okay, so this is a work of a very good friend of mine, Sarah Lloyd. She's a PhD student at the University of Huddersfield. So this is kind of hot off the press research that's coming out. She's been interviewing social workers to look at what their views are of victims of CSA. And I'll read these out because I know at the back where the print's probably a bit small. So the first one says, you can't let yourself be in the situation where men are abusing you. It's just not right for them to be doing that. So young people, you just, you know, you're not doing the right thing there. You know, you need to be keeping yourself safe. It's massive risk-taking behaviour, but children who are vulnerable are prepared to take that risk if it means they're getting a bit of affection. Some of the young people I work with are desperate for attention, and they lavish it up instead of stopping and thinking. And so this really clearly, I've seen people bang their heads on desks representing this stuff. Because we can, you all might sit there, I might sit there thinking, well, I would never think anything like that because I know this stuff, yeah? But in practice, it's easy to slip into these ways of thinking. When we're exasperated, when we're thinking, well, other than putting them into secure accommodation, I just don't know what to do with this young person. And so it's easy for us to position that with them then, because we feel like we're at the end of our tether and our resources and we don't know what to do. And what we need to do is be aware that this is a human tendency and accept that, but then stop and think, okay, it's not a good human tendency to have on this topic. We need to have conversations about how we're going to really look at that. And as practitioners, it means talking to your colleagues when you hear those things happening. And it's not just with this area, blaming the people that we work with for the positions that they're in happens all the time. And that is often because, we're working with less and less resources when need is getting higher and higher. So I just don't want us to feel that as a professional body that we're okay and we've got it sorted, because we absolutely do not. Every day we need to challenge ourselves when we slip into that sort of mode of thinking. What the public think about girls, the misogynist views of girls who end up being abused. Well, the girls want it. They're 13 and they're 14 and they've already slept with a man. A woman showcasing herself to a man who has the propensity to exploit. It's a green flag to a man, and it makes exploitation more likely. So women need to take precautions. Don't walk in a seductive manner unless you attract the wrong type of attention. And I'm not saying a woman should wear a burqa. So again, it's very, I can't remember the right word, but the way that we talk about rape and the way that women shouldn't wear a short skirt, we shouldn't go out late at night. If there's a rapist on the street, we all need to stay at home. We need to make sure that you're not going to abuse me. We need to change them conversations. And we keep saying we need to change them conversations. And actually, child sexual abuse means that it gives us another way to start having them conversations. And sometimes it's hard, isn't it, as a woman, to stand up and say, actually, I don't deserve to be raped. And actually, these are the right conversations that we need to be had. But sometimes we find it hard to make it okay to say that, to put forward our own needs, to exercise our own rights. I think child sexual abuse gives us a narrative to have, to say, actually, this is about our children, and this is about our children's children, and enables us to come at it from a different way and to say, this is another impact of misogyny, and it's affecting the way, it's affecting the future, because it's affecting the way our children are growing up. And it's sad, isn't it? I look around the room, so some of you are my age, and some of you are younger, but I find it really sad that some of the issues that I have to deal with in my teenage years, that my nieces face now in their teenage years, that they're still compromised. It might be a little bit better in some ways, but in many ways it's still not. And in relationships it seems to be still very much the same. And the last one was about stereotypes of women as slags and being loose women. Gives me time to pause. But the research I've done shows that actually, women are definitely part of this solution. There's more women than men in this room today. That's indicative of practice, really, I guess, and people who are relevant in practice. So this is a statement from a woman in some research that we did in Rowland. So I have experienced CSE. It happened to my daughter. And when I found out what happened, I knew what to do, and I went to the police and social services, and I reported it. And now I'm watched by the paedophile gang. And one of the perpetrators was deported, but the case was reopened because my daughter saw him, and he was hanging around school and the area where they lived. and he was verbally abusive to my daughter, and she was so scared. And then the police found him after we reported him, and he was sent to jail. But he sent 2 guys round to visit us to bribe my daughter and to say that the guy was innocent. But my daughter refused to do that. And she said, "Mum, he's destroyed my life. How can I let it go? We've all suffered from this." Powerful women. I mean, when I read that, it was just kind of like, you know, these women, these children are out there standing up against men who are very, very frightening. I was a social worker for a long time in different areas in the Northwest, and I've dealt with cases that involve very frightening men. You know, and when I say frightening men, I'm not just talking about the men that were sort of like, you know, running around Mossad with guns at the time and things like that, but also people in positions of power in the very agencies that are supposed to protect children. And if we're looking to take on child sexual abuse, we are looking to take on people who definitely do not want to be challenged, and that there is reason why this problem, and I won't even go into the whole history about law and, you know, sort of Victorian area of men owning children and wives and things like that. We have a huge problem, and we currently have the benefit of, you know, adult survivors who have been really brave, who are taking this challenge forward and who are reporting offences with, you know, very prominent people in our communities and our society. And we'll see how that goes. But we need to work alongside with those survivors if we're really going to challenge some of this key infrastructure that we need to challenge. We need to be brave. We need to feel fear and do it anyway, as someone once said, because the survivors are brave. Some of the children I've worked with have been the bravest people that I know. And if I can be half as brave as them, then I'll be happy. Sorry, actually. Oh, I need to move on. I've got loads of slides to go. Okay, so there are political constraints and challenges, bureaucratic, there's no money. This is a big problem, and it's a complex problem. That's that slide. Move on. Okay, opportunities. Let's try and talk it a bit. So the good thing is that the government is saying this is a big problem in our society, and we want to do something about it. And I think what's really positive is lots of states and voluntary agencies and survivors and their families are all getting out there and trying to understand and share understanding of what child sexual abuse is and what we need to do about it. So there's lots of really positive things happening. There are great education programmes that start to roll around schools. There's drama groups that are going out and sort of trying to find novel ways to have this conversation with young people and with adults. But what gets missed in that is that we're not talking to some of the people that we really want to be talking to. I've known schools that have set up groups for parents and no one's turned up, because who wants to say, "Oh, I'm going out," you guys did, you're like, "Oh yeah, we're going out today to talk about child sexual abuse." Most people don't want to do that, so how do we engage people and start to make it feel safe to have these conversations? Thank you. I just want to mention the role of the media. So, the role of the media. So we live in a society, don't we, where bad news is good news. You know, bad news, ripping people down, showing what the problems are. This has become the culture of the media that we have. And that has to change. We need to start having much more adult, mature conversations about these issues. We need to stop looking for what went wrong and to expose that into a great way. Because places like Rotherham, they not only have to deal with the problems that they have to then deal with the problem that the problem caused. And so they end up with twice the stuff that they need to do in order to meet the needs of the people who are dependent upon them. And so, you know, I would challenge the media to start engaging in a much more constructive way. And I think partly we do that by, if we see things that are written and they're not right, you all need to have a voice with that. We need to be using our media, we need to be writing letters, we need to be sending emails, we need to be saying, actually, this isn't what we want to hear. So strengthening communities, families and individuals, reducing division and improving services. So I actually think in tackling the problem of child sexual abuse, it actually really gives us a chance to actually come together in communities. Sexual abuse is something that's hidden. You know, it could be happening in your house, it could be happening in the house next door, it could be happening in a house down the street, and we don't know about it. And we need to find ways to allow people to start talking about this. And that means reducing division, not only within communities, not only with, you know, children being able to talk to other children, adults being able to talk to other adults, but also as a practice agencies, people talking to us and us talking to them, without then shoehorning through bureaucratic systems of this is what needs to happen. Without thinking, okay, well, this is the gatekeeper we've got on our agency. No, you don't quite tick the list on that yet. We're not going to offer you a service. We need to start broadening these things out. We have to make sure that every child counts. We can't think, well, how am I going to sort out this problem for 223 million children? It's what can I do today for this child? How can I make this space for this child to be able to talk to me today? And it's about how do we do that for them, not how do they do that for us? Well, they haven't told me, so I can't do anything about it. Okay, what we can do is take time to think about that. What can we do more to enable us to have that conversation? My last point is that we can learn a lot from doing this. And if we think about that, we're just thinking about this in the area of sexual abuse, and we're talking about how we can strengthen communities, how we can build relationships, how we can actually look at providing services in a much more flexible way, so that we actually follow the needs of individuals rather than, okay, you come to our service and then you have to go through these steps. It actually then helps us develop an infrastructure which could be transferred to other areas of social care and social welfare, I believe. And I'm going to stop there. Last slide. Be part of the change. Thank you very much.
I think we knew it was going to be challenging, and it certainly was. Is the Twitter feed red hot? I was busy listening, so I haven't looked. Okay, my first big take-home message from that was that there's a huge job of awareness to do. I was a bit concerned about acceptance at first, until I realised that we have to accept that this happens, but the whole country has to accept that this happens. Everybody who's not even a professional has to accept this happens, and until that happens, we won't make progress. We're ready.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to carry straight on. Get that Twitter feed hot, please. We're going to carry straight on with Dr. Muzammil Quraishi with another, you've got the slides in front of you, but with another very challenging presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, and thanks Donna, pick up some of those themes. Firstly, apologies for the wordiness of the slides, but I want it to be comprehensive. I want to give you a bit of background in terms of where this perspective is coming from. I've been researching issues around Muslim populations and crime for over 20 years now, and as perpetrators and victims of crime. And so this paper is based upon a chapter in a forthcoming text on British Muslim youth, realities and rhetoric. It's about a series of antagonistic discussions about Muslim populations in terms of essentializing Muslims and their religion as the new folk devils, effectively. There we go. I was also, the chapter that I wrote is an opinion piece because I was prompted by a local activist in Rochdale. I don't live in Rochdale, but I knew an activist there who contacted me when the news broke of perpetrators who are predominantly Asian and Muslim. Actually, again, we can see the linking of those terms. As a counter group, a community group, in response to this. And he said to me, would you be on this group? And I initially said yes, because it was just like 3 in the morning something when he rang me. Later I thought, hang on a minute, what? Why? Why am I now responsible for the perpetration of what is a horror crime by a few people, and there may be more, and that's the point I'll come to in a moment. And in other words, does it not reify the connection between a community, a group, and the perpetration? Is this actually a problem because we're looking at this crime as something which is far more endemic and something which is more pervasive? So today, I'm going to try and keep to that half an hour, Tony. I've got a lot to say, and hopefully there's lots of things in the handouts for you to pick up on. But firstly, Donna's already mentioned the politicization of this crime. So, however abhorrent, we've seen that it's figured in political rhetoric, and that's necessary, but nevertheless, one has to question how this crime and the victims are being effectively used to motivate, politicize, and sometimes unsavory aspects of political rhetoric around a whole host of issues that are being conflated about migration and religion and religious rights and freedoms and everything else. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of racialization, linking it to Islamophobia and essentializing. Moral panic, there's a question mark as to whether it's a moral panic, and we might have time in the discussion to unpack that in terms of what the tenets are of a moral panic and why this may or may not fit into the lens of a moral panic. But a moral panic is often misunderstood as well by laypersons and some academics. There are some positives to moral panics, but also I want to focus on the distorting impact of it. Simplifying complexity. You've already observed about how complex this problem and the extent of abuse is. What are the connections being made between communities, perpetrators, victims, racial groups, ethnic groups, religions, etc., and how are those being fabricated? The media is prominent, and in the chapter I discuss about analysis, and I'll come to later as well, in specific ways or examples of how the media do manipulate our sense of blame and a moral judgment on particular groups. And we'll get time for reflection. Thanks, Ashley. So, politicising crime. This was a comment made by former Home Secretary Jack Straw, and we won't have masses of time to digest it, but you've probably read it, you're probably aware of it. If not, you can look that up. And some people, depending on your reaction to it, you should think about your position in a way, because Jack Straw revealed himself in this statement, in the sense that by mentioning and focusing on a particular group, he essentially pathologized that group by saying, actually, when this crime happens and it's perpetrated by a particular group, and people belonging to an ethnic minority group or a religion, then there's something we've got to look at and self-reflect. And there's something wrong with that, because we don't get this statement out when crimes ordinarily happen, because the default position is white males. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with Anglo-Saxon white culture that we have to suddenly navel gaze and reflect upon, which is causing the problem. Thank you. Also, unfortunately, I have to cite Nigel Farage, but it's there for a good reason. We see that again, we've got this statement linking threats around Sharia, so again, and turning a blind eye to sexual offending and issues. Some of the most appalling sexual scandals that I think we've seen in our history, linking Sharia Muslim populations directly with the sexual scandals and countering sexual offending, and that's an important thing. Was on the manifestos of most political parties and all the main parties and some of the British parties. That's right, it should be there, but one has to question why it's there and why it was a particular point and how it's been manipulated also. The broader academic engagement, anybody who's researched issues around crime, ethnic minorities as perpetrators and victims, acknowledge that there is a historical legacy. The way in which we process populations has a historic legacy. So we all can currently tick boxes about our ethnicities, and those categories are to a degree meaningless, but we still use them. We use them, and government use them, and criminologists are very critical of the way in which official criminal statistics are organised, because they to a degree, they're categorised. Okay? And in a way, they're useful for some reasons, and they are very problematic for other reasons. So the reason we've got them, as you all know, many of you will know the history in Britain about the way in which people were exploited, stopped and searched in the 1960s, So in order to counter policies on targeting, we had monitoring of official crime stats. And though that monitoring is a statutory obligation and it's released, and those stats are released and they can be helpful because they can, one, be used by the government and policymakers to gauge whether discrimination, disproportionality is happening, but also, unfortunately, they also serve to connect certain practices, deviant practices in the mind of the public and also policymakers and practitioners. But it has, in its, if we examine that, there's a legacy of a taxonomy, you know, the legacy of biological taxonomy, shifting and sorting populations. And in this area of offending, as Donna's already mentioned, it's to be viewed as part of a broader criminological debate about unrecorded crime. So most crime we don't know about, in fact. That goes for all crime. It's only crime which are processed through, discovered through proactive policing, or in most cases from members of the public who report it, that we know about that crime. Otherwise, most crime is filtered out. There's all sorts of sociological factors why a crime may or may not be disclosed. And in sexual cases, even in sexual offending, we have more reasons for why this crime is not unearthed for all sorts of taboo reasons. But there is a legacy, one must remember, about portraying visible minorities as irrational, as violent, as belonging to less civilized or advanced civilizations. And we now have a rhetoric around what we call xenoracism, a new form of racism which actually conflates. We've got the phenotypical black minorities, black and minority ethnic visible populations from the former Commonwealth, and we've also got new foreign nationals that may actually be white, they may be from Poland, maybe from Eastern Europe, etc. They are all now being conflated within this rhetoric on the new landscape of forms of racism. And it fits into Robert Miles' notion of racialization, the processes. So how do we get to a position whereby sections of society and individuals are defined as different? That difference was historically biological, but shifted to cultural differences. And then also we get a flow of discriminatory practices which are associated with that difference. In terms of the social processes, sorry for self-promotion there, but wrote a text this year on defining the process of racialization, linking it to xenophobia, but it's a question of power relations as well, as to whether you or your population or ethnicity is subject to that process of racialization. Thank you. And this combines with issues of racial loading, which we've already heard. So when I say grooming, you supply the rest of it, Asian grooming. When I mention, riot, we've got race riot. When I mention terrorism, we've got Islamic terrorism. 2005, I wrote a text called Muslims in Crime, and I wrote that the title of that monograph was to be provocative, to say, this is a bit incongruous. Why am I entitled a text, Muslims in Crime? The fact is, most people nod, because they see a semblance, they see a connection between those two aspects of religious identity and criminality. But if I switch it, Hinduism and crime, Judaism and crime, Buddhism and crime, it doesn't have the rhetoric, does it? Because you're already inducted to think about those notions as connected. Thank you. So, a few years ago, I was invited to write a blog in response to the media coverage of what was called then the Asian grooming affair. And this got me to think a little bit about the ways in which we've got the linking of Asians, because the subtext is not Asians actually, it's Muslims. But it used to be that the Asian category in criminology was one of conformity. For many years, being Asian actually was, you're least likely to be involved in criminal matters. This happened, in fact, it's still the case in many categories of offending. But this was, to a degree, very clumsy, and we start seeing that there was absolutely a depiction, a historic depiction of Muslims as wife beaters, fanatics, fundamentalists, book burners. The Runnymede Trust Commission in '97 were the first to publicly articulate this, but academics have been articulating it for many decades before that. In terms of the Asian, Muslim, Pakistani grooming rhetoric, we see this is not something new. Donna's already mentioned this. The turn of the century, it was a different population. The white, Jewish, European populations. There were issues around white slavery and prostitution. So there's a historic notion here, a historical cycle. In terms of moral panics, I know there are a number of social workers who've been working on this issue, and you might grimace and think, oh, well, actually by mentioning moral panic, it's then not serious, it's a fabrication. And that's not the case. The fact is, a moral panic actually distorts. It can amplify reality. It has a base in reality. There are these crimes going on, we know that. There are abhorrent practices, there are abhorrent perpetrators, there are people who are exploiting children in this way. The issue is what the media role is in terms of an accuracy of that problem, distorting it, problematizing particular populations. And in that respect, we do see that a lot of the media rhetoric is around statistics as well. So you get statistics leaked in terms of this amount of people are this particular category being perpetrated. But this area of offending is very problematic because official statistics, the Home Office themselves will say we have to exercise extreme caution in reading across general patterns because of the issues that I've already highlighted in terms of what we know about these types of these offences. So we should caution that. Equally, the whole ethnicity and crime debate, as it's known, is that official stats may give the notion or view of a particular group being disproportionately involved in a crime. But self-report studies give a more neutral response. So a clear example is in drug offences. So in drug offences we get a disproportionate number of BME population perpetrated, prosecuted for drugs offences. Self-report studies indicate drug users across the board, in terms of ethnicity. So again, we need to have this caution. We need to keep this in mind when looking at all forms of crime, in this case, sexual offending as well. Next one, please. So another problem, and this, again, Donna has already picked up on this, is the complexity of the law. And I'm a lawyer, actually, and I get confused with legal definitions. So in terms of the complexity, we see that the offence of grooming a child for sexual exploitation had no agreement among professionals in terms of what the definition should be. Some people link it to paedophilia, and that's a clinical diagnostic, and I was talking earlier with Andrew about this. It's not applicable to all offenders. And part of the problem is that this is compound offences. So there are people that are committing abuse, Donna mentioned that, and exploitation. The difference between this is slight in many respects. You've got organised gangs, you've got prostitution, you've got trafficking, you've got rape. So, but this complexity is not very useful, especially for the media. The media like, the tagline. They like simplification. And also policy makers like it to be quite simple as well. And this linking of grooming to paedophilia is unhelpful. Craven et al., who we'll come to in a moment, have given, I think, one of the most comprehensive definitions, or the broader sociological definition of the offence. And the legal definition is, in the Sexual Offences Act, also was a new act, but it didn't criminalise grooming per se, because the offender must meet the child following the event as well. So it makes it quite difficult for prevention, actually, in some respects. And that's one of the practical challenges. Thank you, Ashley. So that's Craven et al.'s definition. You can read it on your slides. It's not, I'm not going to go through it all, but in terms of one of the most comprehensive definitions, I would argue that one is helpful. So, we can see that academics have been struggling to try and encapsulate the extent of this type of offending. But the media is not interested in those complexities. The nature and motivation of offenders is often couched in these terms. Perpetrators are, predators, bestial, motivated by malice or evil. In case of Asian, Pakistani perpetrators, it's by a conflict in culture or faith, or even endorsed by that faith also. And underlying that is this pathological aspect, an illness, a sickness, a disease, a dysfunction that's operating. But these things don't happen in a vacuum. Also, there are agents and events that happen. We are connected in the same way that you've all got these little computers in your pocket now, the iPhones and the rest. we are connected and it's much easier to get out negative messages as well. Well, Daniel Filler did an excellent piece in 2003 which linked seemingly the incongruous connection between Islam, terrorism and paedophilia. How do these three things connect? And actually there was a series of hate speeches by the Southern Baptist Convention. In 2002 the Reverend Vine, who is known as a hate crimes, let's say that he's committed a number of hate crimes, but he addressed a rally of the large supporters and made a link between Islam, terrorism and child sexual exploitation. The reason why it was significant was that the then President of the US, George Bush Jr., is an adherent of the Southern Baptist Convention. It didn't go condemned. It wasn't condemned. It entered the ether, and then there were a number of shock jocks who began to talk about this, and then you can never separate that association. Okay? So the counter-discourse, me standing here today talking to you, part of a counter-narrative, is also one of the problems of trying to actually, even when you're entitling a chapter or entitling a book or getting involved in the counter-narrative, you start making those connections again. So it's a very difficult but necessary task. And then we look at the UK media and we see, for this text I analysed a number of studies which have been done on media content, and Maura Tal's work, for example, at Leeds, looked at the way in which Islamophobia operated in the media in terms of, one, downplaying genuine issues affecting Muslim populations in terms of genuine stories to help them, or issues that were about plights, and an uptake in those that looked at terrorism and Islam as a problem, Muslims as problems, and Muslim extremism in general. This would be no surprise to people in the room. Next one, please. The dominant rhetoric was Islam being backwards, dangerous, irrational, and those were dominant references. The visuals which accompanied these stories were about Muslims in mugshots, outside police stations or courts. So there's a link in between that image where often you get other people, politicians or policymakers, reclining in chairs outside, within offices, etc. But also Muslims were presented as a homogenous group. You're less likely to get this diversity, less likely to be presented by their profession, more likely to be unnamed or unidentified, especially when they're depicted in groups. That acts as a way of disempowering those populations. Thank you. And there are two topics by Sean et al.'s study in Cardiff on dominant issues that were covered in the period that they looked at, and it was Asian men grooming, and also violent abuse of children in Islamic faith schools. And we see there that the Guardian and Mails are the two kind of politically opposing papers, or with their readership. And it's no surprise that the Daily Mail obviously had a more Islamophobic coverage. And it would be awful because the Guardian actually have an anti-Islamophobia agenda in terms of policy. So that's what they found. They found that there was more Islamophobic content in the Daily Mail. Next one, please. There we go. We also saw that when you saw the political aspects in the papers, that we see the Mail was quoting the children's minister, and he was given as he was talking about the fact that the Asian community was closed. They had turning a blind eye. But we had critical counter voices in the Guardian that actually we shouldn't, and local authorities, people in this room may be working there as well, they shouldn't be discredited or misdirected by stereotypes around the extent and location of such offending. Regarding faith schools, again, similarly, issues of Islamophobic, sensationary, and accusatory, unbalanced, anti-multicultural narrative in the Daily Mail aspect. And we had a more balanced aspect. So, perhaps not surprising to those that study these issues, but it needs to be pointed out that there are political biases in the way in which these stories enter the ether, now also on social media as well. I think I want to end with Rowland because I think I have got 9 minutes. Right, okay. I'm fine, I'm thinking quite quickly. That one of the early studies, or the first kind of comprehensive study by the Children's Commission that came out in the report, was littered with caveats. So if you open that text, you'll see that the first caveat was that perpetrators and victims of CSE come from all ethnic groups. That you shouldn't actually read from the data into a determinism of this being a problem for a particular population. It's for actually, depressingly, for everybody. I should say it's cross-sectional, across society. They also found gaps on victims and perpetrators. So the data was biased, and some agencies go for looking for CSE, whilst others do not. And this is a well-trodden rhetoric in criminology, is that if you point the lens at a particular offence, you will find it. A number of years ago, I was asked on the BBC radio programme about the introduction of cameras in Winslow Road during festivals, religious festivals, and whether this is a good thing. Well, I said, well, do you want to increase the crime rates? It is, because you will pick up more and more crime. So the fact is, if you start looking at a particular area, you will discover this. So if the agencies and others are pointing, I'm not saying they shouldn't be. They should be looking at a whole group of people, including politicians. Okay? However, that'd be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you start pointing the lens at a particular population, you will unearth this as well. So there were all sorts of definitions, problems across different data, the way in which data is collected by external agencies, and also this caveat about ethnicity. But interestingly, in the Berlowitz report, was that BME children had an elevated risk identified by BME faith and voluntary groups, and this was rarely identified by professionals from police forces, more likely to identify white British victims. So there was also a cautionary shot being sent by the Children's Commission there, that you're actually maybe skewing and again neglecting a particular vulnerable group. Next one, please. So there are issues there. I won't go through all of them, but I think the key thing that I wanted to bring out of that slide was that, you know, there were issues about the way in which ethnicities are categorized, but also we cannot extrapolate from that information from 2012 about the ethnic origins of perpetrators. In fact, British white males were the only perpetrators identified in all the sites visited as well. So it remains, that remains the case. Please. So in terms of reflection, I think you need to think, people need to think, all of us need to think about these contexts, that any crime doesn't happen in isolation. There is a legacy, there is a context, and you need to think about, and we need to think about the way in which those things are being connected. Also, very importantly, I'm not an apologist for perpetrators of abhorrent crime, absolutely not. As a father with 3 children, also, it's absolutely morally, to condemn this crime is the only position to be in, actually, but we need to also understand, engage with the reason for why it's happening, how it's happening, and also, as Donna mentioned, to look at perpetrators as also on a continuum of victimology. They're not distinct, harsh differences. In fact, it can be connected, but not in every case. So I think we need to think also about the victim-centered approach. I don't want this approach to detract from the emphasis on victims, and that's very important. But equally, you need to think, and we need to think about the broader complexities which underpin that, and also close people off from engagement is a key thing. So if you've got communities being demonized, if you've got community members who are being pilloried, if you've got people who are being victimized, targeted, having buildings attacked, graffiti and the rest of it, you're going to lead to greater introversion and a lack of engagement. And that's the problem with the dominant rhetoric. I'll end it there. Wow.
Thank you, Muzammil. And to everybody else, I will say I find Muzammil very disturbing. Yeah. Just when I think I know exactly where I stand issues, and I think I'm actually a really nice bloke with a very balanced approach, it shows me I'm just as bad as everybody else. Mm-hmm. So So I've got lots of take-home messages in there, but we've got time for questions.
Wow.
No, I don't think it does. Any comments? Questions? Yeah. Would you like to say who you are?
Sorry, I'm Steph Bateman. I'm from Salford.
Yeah.
Just I find that interesting about, you said in 2003 about grooming not being a criminal act, and it's not. Is that still the same? Has that changed?
It's a question of, it's one of those acts which is, let's say that doing acts which are preparatory towards it can be action, but until the person goes on and meets the child. Okay, so there've been parallels with terrorism in a way, because you can be guilty of acts which are preparatory towards the commission of a terrorist offence, and you'll be prosecuted for that. But the problem comes in, and this is more to do with the dynamics of that particular type of offending, where the grooming takes place normally online, using the internet, electronic communications, and then to get that perpetrator, they need to have physical contact. But I think that there are other offences which are being committed, though, now online, which can be actionable. But it's the specific act of grooming. And I don't practice law, and I've got colleagues in the CPS. There might be people here who routinely prosecute, maybe with the police that can answer that. But the reason I mentioned it in the paper and in my article is because it's interesting that there has to be an action in terms of before that person can be prosecuted. And that might be problematic because you want to actually prevent it before it gets to that stage. Yeah, you want to prevent it before it gets to that stage. And so how does one balance between allowing freedom people to engage and socially interact, and at what point does that contravene the law? So I think it's an interesting point.
Okay, yeah. Say who you are first.
I'm Angela Connor. I'm the nurse for safeguarding children at Tameside Hospital. That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah, great.
It kind of crosses a little bit about what Donna raised as well. I'm very interested in how the media presents these issues, and also like around Islamophobia and things like that. So that what you raised there around the Daily Mail versus the Guardian doesn't surprise me. It just interests me.
No.
I just have to look at the comments section to get that.
Yeah.
It's about where we go with that, because the media is everywhere now. We've got it at our fingertips. We don't have to buy a newspaper anymore.
Yeah.
Even the organisations just across the water, the BBC ITV, are being heavily criticised for lack of independence at the moment as well. Yeah. How do we challenge that? It's such a massive area to challenge what needs to be done.
Counter voices, and the sense that you have the media, people, our students, we have undergraduate students, I teach similar issues, I've been teaching, issues of ethnicity and crime for over 17 years here at Salford. I've only been here 13 years, but that would be difficult. But 17 years I've been teaching that area. And it's always, we've got educated, informed young people who are on social media, yet I present a similar argument and they suddenly think, oh, God, I've never thought about that. The way in which they consume, because it's a drip effect, it's multiple sources. And it's the way in which you engage with those sources and say, I'm going to have a broader intake in terms of finding out about this. So there are building blocks to understanding, because you can't just jump. If I stood up here and jump to saying, well, this is a moral panic and it's this problem, that's not the case. You have to actually set a pathway for people to understand why these debates happen. And if you do that, it's through education, it's through engagement with the media. On another area of my work is on Muslim prisoners and the rights in prison. Another area has been on radicalisation and extremism. And those areas are all hot political topics. The media themselves, I was interviewed only before Christmas, and the interviewer from the BBC said to me, I'm sorry, I know it's an extremely complex topic, but we just want a tagline. And it must be awful for you. And I said, yeah, it is awful. So does one engage? Does one continue to engage with the media because they're going to distill it just into a tagline when there are lots of complex issues? So who is your audience and how does one engage? I hope that the students that we've got, we have 300 graduates, going through, that we can educate them. Also, that you develop a counter-narrative. I mean, the book that I'm just contributed to be frank, it's going to be a hardback that very few people are going to be buying. And so I put it on open source. You can get the article already on our SEEK website. You can read it. It's open source. So there are ways in which you need to educate people and officers. I stood up and gave a similar presentation to Association of Chief Police Officers a few years ago, and I thought this is going to be a very hard audience, and it wasn't, because they completely got the point about the criminological lens. Resources follow risk. So if you create a risk, I'm not saying there isn't a risk, there is a risk, but if you create a particular risk and then the resources follow that, you will unearth crime, and then it justifies the deployment of the resources. So it's a circle. But in doing that, one shouldn't be myopic. One shouldn't then focus on a particular group or particular ethnicity or particular faith group at the exclusion of others. So I'm actually saying there's a broader lens here, and depressingly, that's the issue. There's a broader lens, and this is what one should do. So in terms of what we can do is continue being critical, continue publishing, continue meeting people, public forum, advising. That's all. I mean, I'm one person, I can't do much, but I think, as Donna said at the end, I think the collective to try and educate people.
Can I come back to you? Yes?
I just think there's two major issues. One's racism, the other one is child abuse. And I've worked on the streets of Manchester 20 years ago, and children was being abused by an whole raft of different men. And it certainly wasn't one race of people or one nationality of people. And if we work on that, we deflect that children are still being abused. Donna said right at the beginning, these women in this room have been abused. If you look around the room, the majority of the women in this room that I can see are white women. So what I'm saying is, all those women won't have been abused certainly by Asian men. And we have to look at that. If we don't act on racism and deal with racism, we won't get to that. We'll deflect, and we'll be looking at that, and there's no mistaking what's happening on the media now and in the world and around terrorism, and we're deflecting away from child abuse.
Thank you. I can't see you very well, but I can just see how.
Talking about moving positively and the impact that the media can have on investigative journalism. A place I know very well is in Ireland. We haven't been with very brave journalists, taking a very long time to really, really in-depth investigative journalism with the Irish Times. The Catholic Church would still be as powerful as it used to be when I was a child, and people have to be very, very brave over a very, very long period of time in order to stand up to the Catholic Church, because it absolutely controls every area of your life when you are going in that area. And I'm not saying anything, I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying, but there is an institutional abuse going on, and the institutions are very powerful. And, I was taught as a young child to be God-fearing, so you didn't fear priests in the Catholic Church, and you did think that they were all seeing neighbours. No, I'm not saying that all religions are like that. I'm not saying all churches. There is some correlation between the power of church, religion, and how people can stand up and feel brave enough to say. But the positive thing is, Southern Ireland, things have changed an awful lot, but power has been taken away from them. But the first place, sorry, I can't. The first point was about the investigative journalism that went on and helped victims as well.
You raise a very good point. I'm not, again, it's not a caricature of all forms of media. There are great investigative journalism that takes place. In fact, if it wasn't for various journalists, we'd still be with the Birmingham 6 case, for example, miscarriage of justice. There is a place for good journalism. In fact, journalism can do a lot better than academics in many ways in terms of immediacy. So the media is important for messages, and I've said that there is a way, but there has to be a place for that critical and broader knowledge. In terms of institutional issues, absolutely, that's another problem in terms of the way in which you break through, and there are power differences in the way in which, why is it that certain groups are subject to these events, and where there's responsible journalism, absolutely, that's important. And academics often also cross over into that, and they work with journalists, and they're on documentaries and the rest of it. But there has to be a kind of balance. So there is good and bad journalism. actually many, the strength of good journalism is that they can often, well, they don't have to wait for 4 months to get ethical approval to go and do research with the university. They work to different standards, and they have different ethical and responsible standards, but they also work on immediacy in the sense that something is there, they'll go and investigate it, and they'll produce the work. So actually, and the audiences that they have are far broader than our audiences as academics. So there is a lot to be said there, and forgive me if I gave the impression that there was a caricature of all media. That's not what I'm saying. And also, of course, there are challenges to the organised nature of how abuse persists. I'm not a specialist on issues of abuse, but in terms of that, I can see how, those figures of authority, that's something that could perpetrate or perpetuate rather an exploitative relationship.
Thanks very much. Listen, in 10 seconds I'm going to say it's time for a refreshment break. But first of all, I'd just like to remind you to be spreading the word to other people as well on through the Twitter feed. Can I remind you as well that you are asked to take the opportunity during this break to talk to each other. The whole issue about making research count is to spread good practice, spread the evidence and so on. And can I ask us once again just to congratulate and thank our first two speakers. So now we have Professor Andrew Rowland with a different sort of a presentation, I think we should say. Andrew.
Thanks very much, Tony. It's really great to be able to talk to you today. And over the next 40 or 45 minutes or so, what I'm going to do is take you on a journey that started here in Salford and returns here to Salford. And that journey is going to involve professionals and children and young people from around the globe. And that journey, I hope, will encourage you to travel to learn and to return to inspire. That journey, I hope, will help you to understand how with a few ideas and with a great deal of enthusiasm and with commitment to succeed, we can help to turn sick kids into sick kids. And I'll explain what that means. Of course, throughout this presentation, you are welcome to use social media, and do keep your phones on, because you're going to need them at the end anyway to send a quick text, but I'll tell you what that is at the end. So first, my declaration of interests. The Winston Churchill Memorial Trust is an amazing organisation that I've had the privilege of being involved with since the end of 2013. A charity that was set up on the death of Sir Winston Churchill in 1965. They now fund around 100 to 150 British citizens every year to travel abroad, to gain new skills and knowledge, and to return back to the UK to recommend how our society can change for the better. Or put more simply, you can't stay in your corner of the forest waiting for others to come to you. You have to go to them sometimes. On a journey that took me 35,043 miles to 9 different cities in 6 different countries, I've had the most amazing professional experiences that I really think have changed my career forever. Now, in the report that was launched last year here in Media City, Living on a Railway Line, I've made key recommendations to turn the tide of child abuse and neglect in the UK and overseas. Recommendations that I'm really delighted have been started to be implemented by a number of organisations. We know that child abuse has always occurred, being reported ever since Roman times. We know that 50% of 1-year-olds are hit weekly by a parent here in the UK. We know that at least 1 child every week dies from cruelty. And we know that sexual abuse is rife amongst communities. But it was this community, whilst I was working in Cambodia, that inspired the name of my report, Living on a Railway Line. Because some communities are physically living on a railway line, but other communities back here in the UK and in other countries are metaphorically living on that same railway line, never sure when the next insult to their physical or emotional integrity is going to come from. The communities I've visited, the people I've met, and the experiences I've had have very clearly taught me that we do need to do something different here in the UK if we're ever going to make a difference to the lives of children and young people. And as I'm talking to you, I'd like you to be thinking about what it is that you can do, either in your communities or as professionals, to implement these 7 steps to reducing the abuse. These 7 steps that I've formed from work abroad and here in the UK. Now, tackling things in no particular order. Education is one of the most important things that we as a community can do to try and change the way that our society views children and young people. We know that missing from education is a risk factor for child sexual exploitation, but we need to take a step back and consider in much more general terms the impact that increased educational levels can have on decreasing adverse opinions that communities may have about children and young people, so that they are more properly the valuable members of the community that they are, and are more properly seen in that way by the communities that surround them. Even if that education does mean that their PE lesson is balancing on a railway track and not on gym apparatus in a school. Because education really is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. Now, I genuinely believe that if we were to decrease chronic neglect in society and to fully recognise protecting children as a public health priority, rather than child protection being seen as a social problem, we would make a real difference. Organisations working in the community on child abuse prevention programmes should incorporate material related to adverse childhood experiences. You can see some adverse childhood experiences here for the community we're working with in Chinookville in southern Cambodia. But this education needs to be from adults to adults and from children to be effective. And it must be about recognising these adverse childhood experiences and doing something to minimise them. Now, as Muzammil said in his talk, understanding the reasons in society why children are abused and neglected is the key for us to be able to prevent it. Now, I've deliberately blocked out the faces of those children and young people who number more than one, as I didn't think it was fair on them to show the exploitative situations that they were involved in. But don't mistake me, it's beholden on all of us in our society to recognise the vulnerabilities that exist within our communities and to do something about them. But looking critically at those themes that we've just watched, and what you've seen in that video, am I really suggesting that they're transferable here to the UK? Am I really suggesting that children and young people here in the UK might be being sold? Well, I am. Maybe not for $300 as you've just seen, but you only have to look at some of the cases that, for example, have come out of the Rochdale child sexual exploitation investigations. Look at some of the learning from those investigations to realise that the themes you've seen are not a million miles, not 1,000 miles, not even a few miles away from the parallels that we've seen here in the UK. And I have no doubt that children are being used as a form of currency here in the UK, and that's something that everyone in society has a duty to stop, and to stop right now. The learning from the work that we have been undertaking overseas has been immense. Ever since we set up our partnership between Salford University, a university that I'm not employed by, but I have to say that my colleagues here and the people that I've been working with have a really can-do mentality, and that's why we've been able to set up an international partnership between my NHS Trust, the university, and a social development organisation in southern Cambodia that will really improve the health and well-being of children and young people who are living on and around the streets in southern Cambodia, but also here in the UK, in the northwest of England. Malok Tapang is that organisation, and they envision an environment where all children and young people are allowed to grow up in their own families, feeling safe, healthy, and happy. A society where children are respected and treated equally, and a community where all children are given choices about their future. And when I first announced the partnership that we've been developing, a colleague of mine said, well, that's one partnership that's a one-way street, seemingly indicating that the transfer of education and knowledge would be unidirectional, in his view, from the UK to Cambodia. But he couldn't have been more wrong. Although child labour has fallen by about a third, there are still 168 million children and young people around the world who are forced to work. And I've seen at first hand in Cambodia the effects that children having to work has on them and their communities. But I've also seen some of the solutions that have been adopted in the region where MediaCityUK operates. Providing employment for families so that children can go to school, and training those people who missed out on their own education so that they can offer a sustainable future for their families and communities is one way that that can be addressed. Throughout the world, neonatal and childhood mortality is still too high, but the learning from resource-poor communities who don't have the facilities that we have access to in the UK can really teach us skills of service improvement in a rapid way. The attitude of the multi-professional staff at MediaCityUK is inspiring in its own right, and if we could only transfer a little part of that back to here in the UK, our own health and social care system would be dramatically more efficient and dramatically more sustainable than it is at the current time. Another 168, this time money. The amount of money that the significant negative consequences of violence against children in Cambodia costs is an absolute humanitarian disaster. But aside from those health and social care consequences of such attacks on physical and emotional integrity of some of the most vulnerable members of our society, the economic costs themselves are staggering. Fully recognising that those consequences are having deleterious effects here in the UK too, is a starting point to try and change the minds of those people with political and financial responsibility who may be reluctant to invest new money now to better protect children and young people in the future, instead of face the economic costs for generations to come of failing to act today. Because building a better society for the future is easier and more successful if the building blocks of that society are intact than it is if we're trying to rebuild a community after it's fallen. MediaCityUK offers a viable alternative for the future, an alternative whose programmes and ethos are very much the kinds of solutions that I think we should be looking for here in the UK. Because bi-directional learning, not unidirectional learning as my colleague thought, is at the very heart of the partnership that we have set up. Respecting children and young people for the valuable citizens that they are is one of the fundamental tenets that a society must abide by if we are ever to make any headway into reducing the number of cases of abuse and neglect that they suffer from wherever they live in the world. And providing children and young people with the social scaffolding and social resilience to grow up stronger and more able to launch their own defence against the physical and emotional attacks that come their way gives an opportunity for the whole community to network together to better protect the children within it. Recognising the community-specific risk factors, some here related to Cambodia, but we have community-specific risk factors here in the UK, in Manchester, in Salford, in Preston, in Plymouth, in Birmingham, in every part of the UK. Recognising that those risk factors exist within that individual society, which place children and young people at risk of all kinds of harm, is crucial to be able to address these issues. Now, I've been in that house. That house has 10 children inside it, the kitchen and a bedroom, and it's one of the most spotless houses that I've seen. The great pride that that family takes, even though the resources that they have are considerably less than the resources which many of us in this room, or indeed all of us in this room, enjoy, is amazing to see. So to understand that requires us to take a much more local approach to the specific vulnerabilities that exist within our communities and to be able to tackle those at a grassroots level. I didn't know when I put this slide in that I was going to be faced by a whole host of people with 2 X chromosomes and not very many with an X and a Y. But empowering girls and women to be better able to stand up to the threats that exist in communities that they live in, and not forgetting that boys can also be victims of child abuse, something that's really difficult in Cambodia because the approved child protection documentation only contains drawings of female anatomy and not male anatomy. Understanding that empowering girls and women and remembering boys is at the very bedrock of making our society a less unjust place for children and young people to grow up in the future. Because in Cambodia, it's the women who play a key role in raising their children and taking care of their families. And these women here live in a rural location far away from schools and clinics, so they have an even greater responsibility to ensure that their families are safe and well. At Malopta Pang, we provide outreach medical services and community educational programs to many remote areas like this. And in a country where poverty, ill health and domestic violence are prevalent, some might say the same about the UK, it's vital that women and children are empowered with knowledge and confidence to ensure that their families grow up feeling healthy, safe and happy. Knowledge and confidence that we would do well to learn from here in the UK. Bi-directional learning at the very heart of the partnership we have. Cambodia has one of the youngest populations in Southeast Asia. 41% of people who live in the country are aged under 18 years. And it's also one of the poorest nations in the region, the average salary being less than $3 per day. But there is good news from other partnerships that exist, because even facing such adversity, the under 5 mortality rate has dropped from 116 per 1,000 live births in 1990 to 40 per 1,000 live births in 2012. But that's still too high, of course, but it is another example of where partnership working between countries and between organisations can tackle health and social care problems collaboratively. We know that missing from education is a risk factor for CSE, as is missing from home. And I've been superbly impressed by the skill of the Malopta Pang social workers on their yellow motos, as you see here, being able to track down children and young people throughout the city, throughout the surrounding jungle, to ensure that, as best they can, the decisions that those children and young people are making and the communities are making around them are the safest possible ones for the people who are living in that society. I simply wish here in the UK we could have a society where people living in our communities would look forward to the involvement of social services, would look forward to the involvement of social workers, and would actively seek out the input of a social worker, rather than the very different situation that I find when I'm dealing with child protection cases that we have here in the UK today. Now, if we could make Greater Manchester a child-safe community, where children and young people are actively protected from forms of abuse by the community itself, such as those that I have seen on the streets and the beaches of southern Cambodia, then our region and others around the world would be a safer place for those children to grow up in. Now, recognising the effects that our social situation and housing has on health and well-being, and actively doing something about it, is a key factor involved in the prevention of abuse. Now, this is not a house from the UK, clearly, but we have a housing and social situation in the UK which is contributing to the development of more abuse in society. Now, I've seen there in Cambodia, and you have seen in an earlier video, why one family had to go to the lengths, the last resort that they did for selling their child. And I think that we have to really recognise that those children and young people who are being exploited in all ways around the world are not doing this by choice. They didn't grow up with a life ambition to be exploited. They became involved because they needed something they couldn't otherwise get, be that a roof over their heads, food to eat, clothes to wear, or money to exist. And tackling those social problems, as well as poverty, because poverty isn't something that just affects children abroad, is the root of dealing with the chronic neglect that exists in our societies. Neglect that has to be resolved for those same societies to become safe places for children to grow up in the future. And so, to just give one example, whilst it might seem counterintuitive to not buy from children and young people who are selling lovely goods on the beaches of your next holiday destination, we're would it not be far better, as the Malopta Pang team are doing in Chinookville, to buy those same products from a shop where adult caregivers of those children are provided with employment and an income so that their children can go to school? Because increasing employment in our societies is something that leads to better economic and social development of those societies, and consequently, over time, less poverty, less need for children to be involved in abusive situations through no fault of their own. Sustainability is the key to everything that Malopta Pang undertakes, and here you can see the amazing team who are working hard on behalf of children and young people in the region. A team with just 3 international employees, and the rest being local Cambodian people, is an amazing achievement for British nurse Mahi Eno, who co-founded the organisation over a decade ago. The partnership that we are continuing to develop gives outreach support twice per year, both in their clinic, and all I can say about this photograph is that I'm pleased that the light is quite dim, so you can't see just how hot and sweaty I was. But as well as in the clinic, in communities such as those living on this railway line. Communities that have taught me adaptability and using my clinical skills in ways that I both wouldn't have expected, but also wouldn't advocate in any UK medical student exam. And looking at the wider aspect of health of children and young people brings me on to healthy nutrition. Something I want to talk about because eating a nutritious diet is a major part of maximising the health of children and young people, whatever their background and whatever their social disadvantage. And because of the link between good health, good social care, and better protection from harm, even the basics are things that we should get right here in the UK and also abroad. Because having a focus on health as well as social care is important to protect all of the children in our communities. And if we had a renewed push here to really get child protection seen as the public health problem that it is, it will help us to tackle it better over time. Now, before I go on to talk about what we can do here in the UK, I want to introduce you to some of the team that I have the pleasure of working with each time that I go to Cambodia.
Hello everyone, my name is Salford. I am the director of Malopta Pang. From the children and staff, I want to say thank you very much for your generous support this year. Because of your help, we have provided services to more than 5,000 children. And I would like to introduce you to the team who will update you of the program before the end of the year.
On behalf of medical team, I would like to say thank you to everyone who support the medical team. In 2015, we provide more than free 20,000 treatment in our clinic.
In 2015, we have more than 2,200 children were involved in education activity. Also, more than 700 children and youth participated in art program and sports.
In 2015, our team worked with more than 70 abuse and neglect cases. Also, we have to educate more than 1,000 people in the community about the child protection.
My name is Sampos. I am financial manager of Malopta Pang. I would like to say thank you for your support in 2015.
Our team certified more than 150 new child safe members, and now there are almost 1,000 community child safe members protect children in Sihanoukville. Thank you.
what we're doing here. We provide vocational training skills to disadvantaged Cambodian youth. In 2015, we have around 100 students joining the program, and as you can see, most of them are still in the training. And so far, we have had around 20 students who graduate from here to find a safe job this year.
This year, more than 15 street children use the 24-hour drop-in center. And also, we work with more than 130 drug users in community. And more than 1,000 children and youth join our drug education activities.
This year, I have more than 70 students are training here. We are very happy. We have 7 students are finished, and they have a good job in the other restaurant. Thank you.
We work with more than 3,000 children, and we work with family around 1,500 family also. So our team do a lot of things, but in this year we do a good thing because we reintegration the children back home, around 40 children.
Around maybe 20 children stay in the boys and the girl night center, and 7 baby in the foster care program, and 7 youth in the independent house program.
On behalf of all of the staff and teams, the families and children of Molok Tapang, we would like to say a big thank you to all our friends and supporters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Akon.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, an educational program that has a 100% success rate of getting children and young people into employment, that provides night shelters for 70 children who would otherwise have to sleep on streets and beaches, and has reintegrated in the last year 40 children from all over Cambodia back to their families where they can be cared for properly, is an amazing achievement. But I think we have to remember that to some people this beach, that's Otra's beach, is a place where there are calm waters, golden sand and idyllic sunsets. But to other people, this is their home. Now, as my talk draws to a close, what I want to do is to reflect on how some children and young people have really grasped the challenge of making themselves to make a real difference in our society here in the UK. Because those risk factors that I talked about internationally, the 7 steps that we can take to decrease levels of abuse in our society, and the superb effects of peer-to-peer education are things that we can do here in the UK. Bi-directional learning for a partnership between the university and NHS Trust and an organisation that is about 15,000 kilometres away. So I want to introduce you to this group of children and young people from here in our own region who are tackling the problems of CSE themselves. Now that's the presenters standing next to me in this photograph, and you'll hear more from Wolf shortly. We know some of the risk factors for CSE that exist in our communities, risk factors that are common to the UK and to communities that are based abroad. And this is how one group of children and young people are tackling them themselves in their own version of creating a sort of child-safe scheme for their community here in the northwest of England.
Can I please talk to you for a minute? It's Kayla. Hi, I'm Trevor. One, this is Yo, it's Mia. Hi, it's Alyssa. This is Nikki.
I'm Wolf, and this is the NGY Show. The NGY Show. The NGY Show. It's the NGY Show. The NGY Show. The NGY Show. The NGY Show. It's the NGY Show.
The Next Gen Youth, the NGY Crew, broadcast each and every Thursday on UnityRadio.fm, helping you learn about safer relationships and how to grow up leading happier lives. Jam-packed with new and exclusive music, gaming and fashion reviews, the show has something for everyone.
Working in Unity HQ and travelling out to youth centres, the NGY communicate with young people and help share our knowledge and raise awareness of child sexual exploitation to help young people be safer.
Throughout 2015, the NGY have met and interviewed many new friends from both the music industry and local authorities, from Tinchy Strider, Angel, Gargan Sayre, Gecko and Rio. To Sarah Jackson, Debbie Oakes, Rosa Battle, Anne Coffrey MP and Tony Lloyd. The NGY have been pleased to meet and talk to so many people from every walk of life, all coming together to help raise awareness of child sexual exploitation. So catch us live every Thursday 7 till 9 p.m. on 92.8 FM and DAB in Greater Manchester, on the net at Unity Radio FM and via the free mobile app available in Apple and Play stores.
The NGY Show. The NGY Show. The NGY Show. It's the NGY Show.
Talk to you for a minute.
Go quicker. Because what that video would have shown, if you could see it right to the end, and we'll try and find some way of getting you to see that. Perhaps the easiest way is if you go onto the NGY Show Facebook site, you can click onto the video and it can be broadcast there. You can see it, it's online. But what those children and young people are doing is that their ideas and their words are changing the world around them. So these children and young people are children and young people that I'm delighted to be able to continue to work with throughout this year on a media programme that they're designing to educate their own communities about the dangers that can lead to, but also the protections that exist from child sexual exploitation. Children and young people that I hope will be part of the work that we've commenced here at Salford University and in my NHS Trust, in a project that is fully supported by NHS England, to develop a child abuse risk assessment tool with children and young people themselves, and to transfer that into a format that's suitable to use across health and social care settings throughout the country. But what has all of this taught me personally? Well, I said at the start of my talk that the award of my Churchill Fellowship and the experiences that I've had since then, both in the UK and abroad in Cambodia, have, I think, changed my professional life in a way that I could never have imagined. Now, having returned bursting with ideas of things that we can do here in our society to create a healthier, safer and happier place for children to grow up in, I've now founded a brand new registered charity here in the northwest of England. A charity that has 5 awesome trustees, and I can spy one in the audience today, who are as committed as I am to making our communities, both here and in Cambodia, a better place for children and young people to live in. Because every child should have every chance of good health, every chance of happiness, and every chance of protection from harm. That charity will support us delivering outreach healthcare in Cambodia. The charity will help us to improve the development of children with disabilities by providing sensory room facilities. And that charity will allow children and young people themselves to remind the rest of their community that they still need protection and different forms of support, even when others within that community fail to recognise them still as children. And that charity that will draw attention to and combat the adverse health consequences of homelessness, problems that exist in Cambodia and the northwest of England. Now, with values that are crucial to ensure we act with equity and diversity, having just launched and become registered with the Charity Commission in 2015, I very much hope that 2016 will be a happy new year for all of us, and that we'll be able to look forward to exciting fundraising times ahead. With a goal to relieve sickness and to preserve health, improving healthcare experiences for children, whether that's by providing outreach support to rural communities in Cambodia, and if you'd have been able to see what happened about 5 seconds after this as I fell through this platform to the ground as it gave way underneath me, that was the defining moment which allowed the rest of the community to realise that I wasn't just some stranger that had come to look at their house, but I actually was a human being that had the same problems that they did, caused a whole group of people to come and want to take part in the clinic that I'm sure wouldn't have done otherwise. Or if that is providing support, educational and clinical, such as through our monthly Skype clinics that we've set up, with a team that exists there in Shinultville, or by transferring and applying that learning from abroad to here in the UK, it's very clear to me that we can make a huge difference, all of us as professionals, to the lives of children and young people in two geographically distant areas, but two socially connected communities with the same issues, the same problems, but also the same solutions. I know that from a very personal view, that my involvement with the team in Cambodia has developed me in a way that I could never have imagined. And because I've effectively shaped a new future for myself through this work, full of exciting possibilities and boundless enthusiasm for my colleagues, so that future will also shape me once more. The knowledge that I've learned from the work abroad and applying that here in the UK can and will make a huge difference to children and young people who are living side by side in our communities with us. Because being involved in this kind of work is vital to make our society a healthier, safer and happier place for children and young people to grow up in the future. Because what is the use of living if it be not to strive for noble causes and to make this troubled world, this muddled world, a better place for those who will live in it after we are gone. Now, I said right at the start that you'd need your mobile phones not just to update your social media accounts, but for a final task before we move on to the panel discussion. And in a cheeky plea, if you want to support the work that this charity will be doing, work to improve the health and social care of children and young people in our community, but also our partner community in Cambodia, work that will over time help us to really turn the tide of child abuse and neglect in the UK and overseas, then all I need you to do is to text that number on the screen, and you can be confident that your donation will make a huge amount to those who are present and the future of our global society, the children and young people themselves. Thank you very much.
I'll just stand up and talk after that. I think this mostly started from Winston Churchill travel overwood, and I feel like I'm just quoting somebody here, but don't you feel that if so much can be done with so little, how can we possibly complain that we can't make a difference in the UK to the same problem? And that's my absolute take-home message from this. We've had three great presentations telling us about the problem and encouraging us to look for the solutions, and I think we've just stayed with that same theme throughout. Are there any questions? Well, we're going to have the panel in a second, but are there any questions immediately, first of all, about any of this? Yes, you can give £50, it's okay.
I really like the bit about the remembering boys, because there's been a lot of sort of strategic planning around women and girls in this country, and possibly overseas as well. And as a mother of girl and two boys, I think it's really important we remember boys, not just from an abuse point of view, but also as well from about where their role in society is, and protecting children, because it can become that female-dominated environment. And I just think it's really important we just keep doing that, because actually when boys, I think it's a really difficult time to be growing to be a young man now compared to when I was younger. And I just think it's really important to keep remembering about.
There's a British social worker called Alistair Hilton who moved to Cambodia and set up an organisation called First Steps Cambodia, and their entire focus is on addressing the issues to do with boys and abuse, particularly sexual abuse, but other kind of abuse as well. And the materials that they have and the work that they've done in the community in Cambodia is transferable back here to the UK. And I think that's a really exciting thing. Those people who think that it's, and there are a lot of people who think it's about countries such as ours educating people who live in countries such as Cambodia are completely wrong, because the knowledge and the skills and the experience that they have there is, potentially with a bit of modification, transferable back here. So there's certainly a lot of work out there that will better protect people here, but sometimes you need to look outside. I'm not suggesting there's not good work taking place in the UK, but sometimes you do have to look outside for some extra ideas and help.
Yes? Tell us who you are.
I'm Isabella. I work for Salford Council, I work in housing and in training as well. I'm not sure it's a question or a comment, because I agree fully with the parallel that you can draw from both and what needs to change or what can be done to make changes. But whilst I'm watching that, I'm thinking about the political backdrop and kind of where the differences, and I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
So I'm not a member of any political party, and I voted in completely different ways, but I think that there is a political problem with both the economy and the recognition of poverty at the moment. And I think the way that we can challenge that is to set aside whatever political priorities there might be, and for us as professionals to recognise what it is that we know from working with our communities will make a difference, and to do our very best to try and achieve that, no matter what the political targets might be.
I mean, I really didn't explain that properly. I didn't mean kind of what political party, I just meant the economic climate that we're working in. So, you know, social care is being cut back, and so the voluntary sector is being cut back. And, you know, there's possibly another financial crisis looming. And, you know, we're always having to do more with less. And I guess it's that as opposed to which political party is kind of, you know.
So what I would say to that is I accept that people here in the UK are having to do more with less, but what I want people to try and think for the future is that I want people to do things differently with less, not more with less. And that's really what I've learned from the communities in Cambodia, that actually we're very money focused here. And money is important in the UK, but we can achieve a huge amount with no money at all by changing attitudes, changing beliefs. And we only, as a community professionals, need to change one thing about the things that we do to get 100 changes for the better from just the people who are in the room here, and we didn't need any money to do that. So we can do things differently, even in small ways, without thinking that your small way will affect a bigger picture on its own, because if everybody changes something for the better in a small way, the collective amalgamation of that myriad of changes will make things better for children and young people with no extra resource.
Okay, I think, can we just move into the panel discussion now? You can still ask the same questions that you were going to ask. Can I ask the speakers please to come up and sit in the hiring line? Yeah. Okay, we have our three presenters ready now. I know that some of you have been holding some questions back for this, so we'll get straight into all of that. We have a roving mic. It's actually called Phil. So just put your hand up. I think you wanted to ask something straight away, so we'll start down there, Phil. But if you just give us a wave, we'll try and get everybody's questions in.
I think we have a bigger problem with our societal problem with social media and media really. How are we exploiting our children anyway? And how do we try and slow that down? Because I think it is a societal problem. We've got children using phones and iPads, and we know they're being exploited, and there's lots of exploitation on there, and images of how we present our children, how we allow our children to have those images presented to them, and we're all privy to that because we're all sort of brainwashed into that or indoctrinated into that. And how do we slow that down? Because I mean, in Cambodia, it has an effect on Cambodian children. We're aware of how children can be sold for exploitation into the Western sort of parts of the world where there is more money and finance. So how do we stop children from being exploited as wide as that? And we need to start looking at that as well, I think.
Muzammil, I heard you say something at the break about something that surprised you by your daughter coming home from school. Maybe that links in where she'd come from outside the thing that she'd learnt outside.
Oh, yeah, my son actually, yes. Well, it goes back to education. I mean, I've not had a chance to comment on Andrew's presentation, but I think there's multiple factors there in terms of, there's not one factor, it's a tapestry really of causes and issues. You mentioned social media. I've just completed a project on the influence of social media on political views and political extremism, in fact, amongst school children and university learners and college learners within Manchester, in fact. And actually, when you start looking at anything, like any problem, you start unearthing greater complexities, because firstly, the social media itself is not of itself to blame. Of course, it's and also it's contested in terms of the degree to which that can influence us or not, depending on the particular behaviour. So the link between exposure and your behaviour is not clear. Of course, there is a link in terms of the way in which the technology is being used to propagate, to send, illegal images or to influence people. We're not saying there isn't some connection, but the hard, fast sort of hypodermic link, the hypodermic model that you're suddenly getting this message and then reacting to it needs a bit more sophistication. In terms of parents and their, one thing from that study, I don't want to preempt the findings, it's still with the council, literally on Friday I submitted it, is that parents also, we have varying levels of sophistication of knowledge about risk, and not to be here, promoting this kind of, not to cause great anxiety amongst parents, but nevertheless we found that there were people who had less knowledge of the way in which you can filter, use technology, put checks in, the way in which we are using technology to kind of appease children, very young children, giving them an iPhone or iPad at lunch or whatever it is. So I think there's something there, but I'm not an expert on those. It's very hard to get any empirical research on cause and effect. But in terms of what I've heard just now as well from Andrew, in terms of connected approach, in terms of improving living standards from multiple aspects, both education, both income, which is also linked in. They're all interconnected in that respect. So what you're asking us is, there isn't one answer, and it's kind of we can't have one silver bullet, but connecting these issues about one, if I was putting my criminological hat on, there's a question of reducing the kind of target aspect of attractiveness of target. Other things are about opportunity, but these are compound crimes with multiple causes and multiple aspects, and in the same way as we wouldn't look at one policy to, let's say, curb homicide or murder, it's the same with sexual offending. There are multiple causes, multiple aspects, but within, I think education is a key thing I'm going to keep on emphasising. And the example that Tony mentioned was actually about from preschool. The question of my son came home from preschool and started using racist expletives, and his world was literally our family and my broader family. So I went to the preschool manager and said, look, I don't want to make a great noise about this, but I would like you to raise, if kids are saying this, because this is absolutely where he's heard it from, intervene. And the manager's response was that, oh, they hear this amongst other siblings. It's not that they're racist. It's just that it's the language of the environment that they're in. So rather than apologising and say, yes, I'll be more vigilant, I will intervene because it is our duty to intervene, we have a duty of care. That was the wrong response from us. So I suppose small ways, but colleagues?
So I live my life on social media. They're 6 o'clock this morning. I don't think we slow it down. I don't think we can. I think we need to speed up and catch up with it. Young people grow up these days with sending photographs of themselves and communicating on their phones. You sit in a lounge with teenagers these days, they're just there, aren't they? I'm one of them, I must be a teenager again. They're on the phone doing those things. I think we move into the spaces, these dark spaces where people share this information. And I know that the police are there already, that they're trying to survey this, but this is a huge problem. And we all need to take ownership of that. I think it's things also like, if somebody receives an image on their phone sent by somebody that just isn't right, that's of a child in an abusive situation, somebody needs to feel okay with phoning the police or telling somebody in a position of authority that they've had that. We need people to feel confident enough to do that, because that happens and no one says anything. They might say, oh, I've had this and I don't know what to do about it. They don't do anything about it, and the person themselves doesn't do anything about it because it becomes diluted from the source. So I think it's about feeling okay with reporting what they say on social media, but the resources to combat that
sure that we have integrity and that we are giving back to that there is always a contribution back from any agency, university, company, in what they're giving back in part of that solution, not just taking it from them.
There's a wealth of experience and wisdom in the room. Does anybody from the audience want to say anything about this? Yes, tell us who you are again.
I'm John Rowland, I'm the superintendent in Greater Manchester Police, and there's just a couple of things today that I picked up on. I think probably I can allay some concerns really, in particular last point that's been made. During the last 18 months, Project Phoenix was run in Greater Manchester to look at tackling CSE, and we started the It's Not OK campaign in September 2014. So if any of you have not had a look at the website, or had a look at Twitter, I'd urge you all to have a look at that, because there's some really, really good information on there that can advise parents, professionals, children, lots of information, in particular around social media. So every time new apps are used or new networking sites, have a look, because we're putting warning signs out through social media to alert the public. Another point that's been made today is around children and being under 18. Now there is some gaps in the law, in particular children between 16 and 18. Now you may have read around Anne Coffey, and she's actually campaigning to increase and get better laws for children between those age gaps. However, when things are reported to us, we actually look at what offences are committed. So, if it doesn't particularly fit a particular offence, we'll actually try and look at different offences that can be used. So, for example, if it doesn't fit grooming, or if it doesn't fit rape, or if it doesn't fit that particular offence, there are other offences that we can look to use and prosecute for, such as incitement, or paying for sexual services and things like that. If those offences don't fit the criteria, we'll then look at civil powers and other things like that. So just to have some reassurance, just because it doesn't fit a particular offence, we will look at other ways, other powers, and other destruction methods that we can use to target offenders. But more importantly, what we will do is look at what we can put in place for the victims to help them, support them, educate them, but not only the victims, the parents as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, just a couple of other points. Mentioned earlier around the offending profile across Greater Manchester. There were some concerns around the racism issues. Now, since spam, there's been massive issues, largely caused by the media and the sort of misrepresentation in the media around CSE offenders being predominantly Asian males. But that's caused a massive problem for us. As part of Project Phoenix, we've been trying to educate people, and the clear messages that we send out is that offenders are from every walk of life, but not only that, our victims are from every walk of life as well. So across Greater Manchester, our offending profile is very, very different. So the same type of offenders that we would have in, say, Rochdale are very different from what we would have in Salford or what we would have in Oldham. It's different, but by far the most common offending profile we have is individuals acting alone. What I've seen significant increases during the past 12-18 months is with online offending, and that is on significant increases. So for all of the warnings and sort of information we're giving out to the public, new sites, use apps that children are using, every day there's a new one coming out, and we can't keep ahead, and we can't keep up to date with sort of the new sites that are coming out. Unfortunately, pedophiles are far more experienced than us, and they know about all these sites. And they are looking at every type of offending or every type of possibility that they can actually get access to children. But the streets ahead of us, and our biggest threat is from online offending at present. But trying to keep up with that technology is a massive, massive challenge for us.
Okay, there's somebody just wants to come in at that point. Jamil?
Hi. Jamil Hadi, I'm a lecturer here at Salford. Thought the three speakers were
fantastic. I've really enjoyed all three contributions, learned a lot. Seems to me that one of the things we need to do is think about agency in young people and present young people as more than just victims and passive in this process. And I think Andrew captured that by his kind of co-production or by involvement when he talked about that. One of the things Every Child Matters said, I don't know if people remember this, is it said, we cannot divorce child protection from policies to improve children's lives. And I think we need to have kind of some serious look at looking beyond frameworks of risk towards looking at how we provide youngsters with more choices, because if they have more choices they will make better choices. So that's kind of my position on this, that everything that's said is fantastic, but we need to be thinking of new ways of working and engaging children and young people. And I think to be honest, we had a fantastic example at the end from Andrew around all his work, and I'm for one am very, very interested now in supporting and getting to know more about sick kids. Thank you.
So we've linked two issues there. There's the issue of the rise in internet issues as being particularly problematic, and the need to not stop trying to protect children, but increasing the ability of children to protect themselves. Does anybody else want to, either on the panel or in the audience, want to come in at that?
I was going to say one thing in response to, we've got us concerned around social media, and quite rightly so, and right from what Peter has to say in online review. My father-in-law was born in the 30s, so was a teenager in the 50s, and he said he was told rock and roll and television would completely corrupt the so there's always new things that are going to come along that us older people are going to be really worried and anxious about, because we can't keep up with it and can't maintain it and things. I think we need to just get a balance as well to look at how social media can be used really positively, although like I say, we can't keep up with some of these sort of more uncanny things that happen within there.
I just wanted to respond to representatives from GMP in the sense that and also echo your concerns, but in terms of social media, there is a new dynamic in the sense of the immediacy of it, the proliferation of it, and the fact that it's interactive in the sense that it's actually asking you to engage and act in some way rather than just passively observing an image, for example. So it has a consequence. So that's the risk factor. There are parallels in the literature on extremism, political extremism, and sexual offending in terms of the social media research has looked at online influence but also offline influence, and the research from, let's say, a meta-analysis of over 180 cases, 180 articles that have looked at this, not many are empirical in the sense that they've not conducted research, primary research, but of those we see that offline behaviour is significantly important still to the online, to the behaviour change. In terms of political extremism, now in terms of sexual offending, we've already had examples of where the offence has taken place because they've got, Donna mentioned that example where a child has been manipulated and it's happened in that respect. So there is one of the theories is that the internet increases the forms of the volume increase. Another is that it increases the speed of it as well. And another is it's a facilitating, it's an echo chamber for like-minded people as well. These are just three limbs of the kind of research and the parallels with political extremism and other forms of crime. So I'd say the jury's somewhat out. As a parent, I'm hesitant to, I balance between these issues, but I do nevertheless keep an eye and check on my 11-year-old, 7-year-old boy, 2 boys, and my daughter who's 4, who is actually very proficient on an iPad at 4. And I think there is a duty there, and I think there's that concern. The other thing is there are offences that can be committed on the net, which the other thing I wanted to raise, just I don't want to dominate the discussion, is that precisely when the police do require an investment, Met's report into smart policing a few years ago now that recommended investment in cybercrime and investment in helping to police crimes committed through the internet, there's been a disinvestment, a de-investment, or basically a lacking or a reduction in funding to cybercrime units. And I know recently they've had some call, but if you look around, and GMP, I think, is it not a reduction, is it 18% reduction by whatever it is, 40% reduction in certain costs by 2018. So you've got precisely at the time where there's proliferation of new forms of technology being used for, some may argue, old crimes, new form, or new crimes being committed on the internet. You've got a disinvestment in the resources. So I do empathise with that challenge that you need to have, and police forces need to have investment in that technology because it's so rapid.
Thanks. I had a question before we started from Kate Plant. Is that you know?
Yeah. Hi, I'm a social work student at Salford. Donna, you were talking earlier about getting society to talk about child abuse more, and I can relate to the difficulty of that, because I know if I'd asked my husband to come here today, he would have found any excuse to do something else. But I think there also needs to be a change in attitudes towards perpetrators. There was a programme recently, The Truth About Child Sex Abuse, and at the end it was talking about catching people earlier and using the criminal justice system more. But to me, that's already too late. You know, a child's already been abused. And as I understand it, there's some countries that offer support to try and help prevent people from carrying out abuse, which is not something that we do here. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about how successful those sorts of programmes are.
I don't know those programmes specifically. I suppose my approach to it is what I've been thinking about in preparation for today, which might sound a bit odd, and my thoughts aren't necessarily fully formed on this, but it's to desexualise child sexual abuse and to take the sex out of it almost, because that sits with offenders in some ways. And if we're looking at children and prevention, it's about looking about what are good relationships, looking about how we share and communicate. Because what we actually might consider an offence today would not have been an offence, say, 50 years ago, might not be an offence in 10 years, or we might be creating new offences. So I think if we focus on some of the activities that are named, it's looking at the context of that. So I think it's about engaging young children, and schools are doing this already in primary schools, in what is good relationships, what are good ways that we relate with one another, how do we share feelings and emotions, what happens if a child is autistic. It means meeting elders in society, it means talking to parents, people who don't want to have these conversations, we need to have in different ways. It's really about how we relate and we respect ourselves and we respect others, and I think if we keep it to that, it's easier to do that than it is to focus on sex.
Well, one of the things that I think is so work's been done by the Singapore Children's Society, and they did something. They basically took a questionnaire and they asked some members of the community what constitutes child abuse, and they listed a whole number of things that can occur to children in a community, and they said, do you think this is child abuse? Do you think this is right? Do you think this is wrong? And then they did the same with a group of professionals. They gave them the same questions and said, do you think this is child abuse? Do you think this is right? Do you think this is wrong? Doesn't matter what those things were. The key thing is there was a difference between what the community thought and what professionals thought. So the way to target a lot of these things that we need to address is to go right back to community education. And the difficulty we've got is that that things to do with technology, for example, or things to do with circumstances that exist in society now, and not the circumstances that existed years ago when people who are parents now were children years ago. So I think there's a real role here for peer-to-peer education and getting children to teach themselves about what our modern society is, what dangers that exist within it, and what they can do to protect themselves in the future. Getting the society that those children live in to understand what is and what isn't abusive, and what is a good relationship, what is a healthy situation for children to live and grow up in, and what is a safe city or a safe environment for them to live in. Effectively, what a child-safe community is the way to change over time the way that that community views children, and over time, if that can be achieved, the number of abuse cases will drop.
Listen, I'm really sorry to have to do this, but you know, you won't believe this, we're just about right out of time. You used up all of the time. There's still so much more to discuss. Can I ask you to please complete the evaluation questionnaire? It helps us to make sure that these events meet people's needs and that we're still on the same wavelength as people who come to attend. I feel quite ashamed to try to summarise everything that's been said and achieved today. I think we set off with some very challenging issues that perhaps made some of us feel fairly uncomfortable, and that was intended. But I think we must go away remembering that all three of the speakers have said, while there are many challenges, there are also the possibilities for solutions. And it is possible for us to find those solutions if we work differently, if we continue with this sort of event where we share experiences, challenge ourselves and learn together. So that's it. Can I ask you once again to give the speakers a last...
So I want to build a CSE army. I want us to capitalise on what we did today and then we look at what we're going to do tomorrow. Otherwise, today was just a lot of hot air and it doesn't really mean anything. So if you could take down this web address, the University of Salford is involved in lots of really great projects which we've not had time to talk about. And there's a mailing list that you can join there. You can see the research that we're currently doing. There's more projects which will be put on and advertised in the next week or two. And we've got a whole series of consultation events where we want to engage with you on active research and project development that's going on. So we're actually working with you. There'll be young people involved as well, so that you become part of what we're developing for the future rather than just hearing about it as an afterthought. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Last plea. If you don't need these, please come have these lanyards back and we'll use them for next time as well. Slona Lana, safe home everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And we've finished.